أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي اللهم افتح علينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وتعليما الحمد لله أما بعد. So we're at the end of the section on the first part of Imam al-Ghazali's Bidayat al-Hidayah in terms of the acts of obedience. And so we'll finish this section today, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, and then next week we'll begin part 2, which is on refraining from disobedience. I'll also post the first assignment, which I spoke about briefly yesterday. And all the assignments for this course are going to be the same, where it's basically you choose a section in the part that we've read. So part 1 in terms of, on obedience, and then you write a reflection on that section in terms of the relevance that it has for you, and that also how you'd be able to put it into application or implementation in our context here in the modern age, so to speak. So it's a reflection that's between 500 to 750 words, so 2 to 3 pages, right? And so it's something that really resonated with you. That you choose a section. It could be a few sentences, or it could be a paragraph from the first part of the book that we've read through, and that which it resonated with you, and so then the idea would be to write a reflection on that in terms of its relevance for yourself, how it resonated for you, and how you would apply it in our time. So I'll post that inshallah this week when I also post the video. So right now we're in the section of Adab al-Imamati wal-Qudwa. So this is the etiquette of leading and following in the prayer. So we've completed the sections in terms of the adab of the method of the prayer and how to perform the prayer itself. And as I mentioned last class, that this is focusing a lot on the fiqh aspects of this, right? Looking at some of the different aspects of the fiqh. Because it's imperative that we understand the outward before you're able to move onto the inward. So he begins this section by saying the Imam should make the prayer brief. Anas radiallahu anhu said, I did not pray behind anyone whose prayer was more brief or more complete than the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so he begins, this is in terms of the adab of the Imam. When a person is leading the prayer, the etiquette is not to make the prayer lengthy. And this is there's a hadith in Sahih Bukhari that Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu narrated, أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إذا صلى أحدكم للناس فليخفف فإن منهم الضعيف والسقيم والكبير وَإِذَا صَلَّى أَحَدُكُمْ لِنَفْسِهِ فَلْيُطَوِّلْ مَا شَاءَ. So this is Abu Huraira, a hadith in Bukhari, in which he narrated the Prophet, the Messenger of Allah said, if any one of you leads people in prayer, then he should shorten it. For amongst them are the weak, the sick, the elderly, and if anyone among you prays alone, then he may prolong the prayer as much as he wishes. And so this is referring, of course, to the fard prayer. When it comes to nafil, we have a number of narrations where Sahaba would pray behind the Prophet ﷺ in terms of voluntary prayers or supererogatory prayers, whether it was Qiyam al-Layl or otherwise. And the Prophet ﷺ would lengthen those prayers. Why? Is because that's not something that is obligatory upon people. So people have the choice. If they want to join in that prayer that is nafil, praying behind the Prophet ﷺ, and he lengthens it, there's no issue with that. But this is specifically referring to the fard prayers. And so when it comes to the fard prayer, if a person is leading, they should make the prayer brief. They should make it shorter in consideration of those who are behind them. And so that it does not, push people away from the prayer, right? The fard prayer. That, they begin to find it burdensome or difficult upon them because the imam is prolonging the prayer. The imam should not make the opening takbir if the muezzin has not yet finished the call to commence, nor before the lines are straightened. So the idea here is that, the iqama is given, and it's not like as soon as the muezzin finishes the iqama, or even before he finishes it, that the imam begins the prayer. No, he should wait until the muezzin finishes the iqama, and then gives an opportunity for people to straighten their lines before he makes the takbiratul ihram. The imam should raise his voice with every takbir, but the follower should only raise his voice so that he can at least hear himself. And so this is something that I mentioned before in terms of what is considered as the minimum level of reciting silently, right? Because there's prayers that we recite silently and there are prayers that we recite out loud. The minimal level is that I can hear myself, but the person who's standing beside me would not necessarily be able to hear me, but I need to recite it. And so that means that I move my lips, move my tongue, and I can actually hear myself say the words, Allahu Akbar, right? But so even if you're whispering it, Allahu Akbar, I hear myself saying it, but the person beside me doesn't necessarily have to hear it. That's the minimal level of audibility when it comes to reciting sirran, or silently. The imam should make the intention of leading the prayer in order to attain the merit of doing so. If he does not form this intention, then as long as the followers have made their intention to be followers, their prayer is correct and they will attain the merit of following. So in the Shafi'i madhab, the one who's leading the prayer, the imam, he needs to have the intention of being an imam. He needs to have the intention of leading the people in the prayer. Now, if he doesn't make that intention, his prayer is valid, meaning that it counts, and the follower's prayer is valid, but the imam misses out on praying in jama'ah. So it would be as if he was praying by himself. Whereas the followers, if they make the intention of following and they pray behind the imam as following, they get the intention of fulfilling the obligation as that their prayer is correct, it's sahih, as well as they get the reward for praying in jama'ah, right? Whereas the imam would not get that reward. Now, this is for any of the prayers that their prayer is considered as valid and the imam's prayer is considered as valid, even if he doesn't make the intention of leading, okay? The exception would be for Jummah prayer. With Jummah prayer, he must make the intention that he is leading the congregation, otherwise his prayer is invalid. It changes the validity of the prayer if the imam does not intend to pray Jummah prayer with the intention of leading as the imam, simply because Jummah prayer is not valid if it's not in Jama'ah, right? Whereas Dhuhr prayer, it's valid, right? You don't have to have the intention of it being in Jama'ah for it to be considered as valid. And so that's why it's imperative for Jummah prayer in particular that the imam has the intention of leading the followers, so that the prayers of everyone really are considered as valid. The imam should say the opening supplication and the ta'awudh silently, like one praying alone. So the opening supplication, which is what was mentioned previously, and then the ta'awudh, a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. So he says those silently. And again, when it says silently, it means that he recites it such that he would be able to hear himself recite it. He should recite the Fatiha and the Surah aloud in both rak'ahs of Fajr, the first two rak'ahs of Maghrib, and the first two rak'ahs of Isha. The individual praying alone does the same. So when it comes to Fajr, Maghrib, and Isha, the first two rak'ahs, or the two rak'ahs of Fajr, that whether you're praying by yourself or you're praying as an imam leading, then you recite it out loud. And again, the understanding or the definition of reciting out loud is I recite such that it's audible enough for the person beside me to hear it. So if I recite out loud, meaning the person beside me could hear it, I fulfill that sunnah of, reciting out loud. That's the minimal audibility, but of course it's not the ideal. The ideal is that, as you hear the imam reciting, that, everyone in the congregation should hear that recitation. So whether you're leading the prayer or whether you're alone. Now, in the Hanafi madhab, it's actually wajib to recite out loud. In the Shafi'i, it's not. Okay, so say, for example, if an imam was leading the prayer, it was Maghrib time, and he was reciting al-Fatiha, but he forgot to recite it out loud, and he was just reciting it, to himself silently. Does he need to repeat the prayer? No. Is the prayer valid? Yes. Why? Because recitation out loud is not considered from the arkan of the prayer. It's not considered as a rukn, meaning a pillar of the prayer, that if a person doesn't do it, even if intentionally or out of forgetfulness, that their prayer is invalid. Reading out loud in the Shafi'i madhab is not a rukn, whereas in the Hanafi madhab, to recite out loud is considered as wajib. So it's best to recite out loud just to remove oneself from the difference of opinion. The imam should say Ameen aloud in the audible prayers, as should the follower. So when the imam finishes the recitation of al-Fatiha, he says Ameen out loud. And then the followers would also say Ameen along with the imam. So the follower and the imam, they should say the Ameen at the same time, not afterwards. So it's not like the imam says it Ameen and then the followers say it Ameen. It should be done at the same time, and it should be done out loud. In the Hanafis, neither the imam nor the followers would say it out loud. They say it, but they say it silently. So it's just a minor difference of opinion there. On the next page, it goes on to say the imam may pause for a moment of silence after the Fatiha to catch his breath. During this pause in the audible prayers, the follower should recite the Fatiha silently to himself so as to enable himself to listen when the imam is reciting. So in the Shafi'i madhab, as was mentioned before, the follower behind an imam, it's actually a rukn for them to recite the Fatiha. It's an obligatory aspect of the prayer. In the Hanafi madhab, it isn't. So if you're a follower, you simply make the intention of following the imam. You don't even have to recite, because the imam's recitation, it suffices. Whereas in the Shafi'i madhab, for the Fatiha in particular, that it is not sufficient for the imam to be the one who recites it alone, but the follower recites it as well after the imam has finished his recitation of the Fatiha and during that pause. And even if the imam begins reciting the small or the surah that in the first two rak'ahs of the prayer, that's out loud, the follower would still recite the Fatiha in the Shafi'i method. So they would recite it entirely. And even if the imam was to go into ruku' and the follower still hadn't finished reciting the Fatiha, they would still finish reciting it, unless they're a latecomer, which has different rulings. But we won't get into that simply because that's not the place here. The follower should not recite any surah other than the Fatiha in audible prayers, except if he cannot hear the voice of the imam. So if he's praying in a congregation and he's very far back and he can't hear the voice of the imam, then he could recite another surah after the Fatiha, but it's not required, and he shouldn't, or she shouldn't recite the surah after the Fatiha. The Fatiha they should recite, but not the surah that comes after the Fatiha. The imam should not say more than 3 tasbihs while bowing and while prostrating, nor should he add anything more in the first tashahhud after the words Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad. So when it comes to the tasbihs of the bowing and the prostration, Subhana Rabbil A'la, Subhana Rabbil Azim, Subhana Rabbil Azim in the ruku', Subhana Rabbil A'la in the sujood, the imam should not recite it more than 3 times, right? If you're praying by yourself, you can recite it more than 3 times. 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. It's open. But if a person is praying leading people, then they should not exceed 3. Again, out of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ not to lengthen the prayer for the people that are behind them. And then the same thing is with the tashahhud. That in the last tashahhud, it says he should only read Fatiha in the last 2 rak'ahs, meaning that you don't recite another surah if it's more than 2 rak'ahs. And he should not lengthen the prayer for the followers, as was already mentioned. He should not lengthen his supplication in the last tashahhud beyond the combined length of the tashahhud itself and the sending of blessings upon Muhammad, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the idea is just, you say the tahiyyat, you say the salawat al-Ibrahimiyya, and you might make a short dua, and then you conclude the prayer. When making the closing salutation, the Imam should intend sending peace upon the congregation, while the followers should intend by their salutation the returning of his greeting of peace. So this is to show again the importance of intentionality, that you have a sense of awareness and presence of what it is that you're saying. Now, even for the Imam, that these intentions should be there. That when he gives the salams on the right, it's to the angels on the right and all the angels who are praying, as well as all the Muslims who are praying on his right side, and then the same thing is on the left. Immediately after the salutation, the Imam should turn around and face the followers. He should refrain, however, from doing so if there are women behind him, allowing them thereby to leave first. None of the congregants should rise until the Imam rises, and the Imam can turn to leave from his right or left as he wishes, but I consider the right to be preferable, and that's just from the Sunnah. Now, when it talks about the Imam facing the congregation after the prayer, right? The Sunnah is that when the Prophet ﷺ would finish the prayer, that he would turn so that his right side would be facing the congregation. So remember, the face is this entire part of the body, of the head, right? From the ear to the ear. So if any part of it faces the congregation, then it's considered as facing the congregation, right? And so, the impression is that, that he would put his back towards the Qibla, right? But that's not the case, because, people would think that, this is what it means to face the congregation. But rather, the Prophet ﷺ would sit with his, after finishing the prayer, he would turn so that his right side is facing the congregation, and he'd actually be looking at the right side of the congregation, that they could be able to see him. And that's one of the reasons why there's such a preference amongst the Sahaba for them to pray on the right of the Imam, because they would get to see most of the Prophet ﷺ's face, right? Now, those who are sitting on the left, they'd still be able to see him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but it would be from the side, right? Whereas the Prophet ﷺ would be looking, directly at the people who would be praying on his right. Hence the reason why the Sahaba would strive, to pray on his right side, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so that's what it means to face. Now, the reason why if there is, women, it's just the adab out of akhlaq, to allow the women to leave first. Again, just, for purposes of modesty and so that they don't feel a sense of haraj or, that uncomfortable because, for the Imam to look, for example, and see the women leaving or something of that sort. Now, the next part, it says the Imam should not specify himself in the supplication of qunut in the Fajr prayer. So in the Shafi'i madhab, we mentioned that in the second rak'ah, after coming up from ruku'ah, it is a sunnah mu'akkada for the Imam to recite a dua, Allahumma hadina fi man hadayt wa afina fi man afayt, till the end of it. Now it says he shouldn't specify himself in the supplication, meaning that he makes it singular. Allahumma hadini fi man hadayt wa afini fi man afayt. And so the idea is that any time the Imam makes a supplication, any of the supplications during the prayer, then he includes the congregation in his supplication. So if he's coming from out of sujood, the dua is Allahumma ghfirli, Allahumma ghfirli, right? One of the du'as, or Allahumma ghfirli warhamni wa'afini. If he's praying in congregation, then he should say, Allahumma ighfir lana, warhamna, wa'afina, right? So that he puts it into the plural form. And he should say this, rather, and so it says, rather he should say, oh Allah, guide us, Allahumma hadina. And this is based on a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that Ibn Majah and others narrate, that an Thawban, the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, he said, لا يؤم عبد فيخص نفسه بدعوة دونهم فإن فعل ذلك فقد خانهم. So that, the Prophet ﷺ, he said that no one person should lead others in prayer and then supplicate only for himself and not for them. If he does that, then he has betrayed them. فَقَدْ خَانَهُمْ. Because he's excluding them, right, from his dua, that he's the leader, he's the imam. He should be, leading the congregation. And so the idea of him making a dua for himself without making a dua for the congregation that he's leading is a form of betrayal. Now, this is from the adab. This is to say that it would be makruh for a person to do that, but it does not invalidate their prayer, right? And so from the adab of this, I mean, sometimes, I've seen some scholars, what they'll do is that if, say, for example, they're leading a congregation in prayer, and everyone's on carpet, but then the imam will have a musalla for himself as he's leading. I've seen some imams, what they'll do is they won't use that. They'll fold it up and put it aside, just out of adab, not out of the hukum, that there's something wrong, but it's just from that door or that principle of being equal with the congregation, so that if everyone's got musallas, they're all praying on their carpets, then he can use it. But for the musallin, those who don't, they don't have a carpet or a prayer mat, and then he uses a prayer mat, it's just out of adab, not out of anything, and it's not to say, and don't go and say to imams, if you see them praying on a prayer mat, hey, this is bad adab or something like that. No, it's not. I mean, that's something that, the imam, sometimes they can, out of adab, that they do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's just out of etiquette, towards the congregation. But it doesn't mean that if they don't do that they have a lack of etiquette. No, it doesn't mean that whatsoever. The follower, he should say it out loud. So now this is the dua al-qunut that he's going on to say, that he should say the dua out loud, and the congregation should say Ameen. اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت آمين وعافنا فيمن عافيت آمين وتولنا فيمن توليت آمين, etc. And they should not raise their hands, as doing so is not established in the narrations. So there are different opinions about that in terms of, the imam would raise his hands. Do the followers raise their hands or not? Both are acceptable. Whether they raise their hands or they leave them down, both of them are considered as acceptable. The follower should recite the rest of the qunut from the point at which it is said, verily you decree and none decrees over you. فَإِنَّكَ تَقْضِي وَلَا يُقْضَى عَلَيْكَ. And that the follower should never stand alone in a row, but rather should join a line or pull someone to stand next to him if no space is found. So sometimes you find that if people they're praying and a person comes in late, that if he finds that there's no space in the line, right, what this is saying is he shouldn't stand by himself and start and pray, start his prayer, but rather he should pull someone back, right? Like, sometimes you'll see them that they'll just tap them on the shoulder or pull them back, just so that there wouldn't be one person standing in that line alone, right? Now, a lot of times if people are coming late, there'll be others that will come and join them, and so he can just wait like a few seconds just to see if there's anyone else that's coming. That way he doesn't have to pull anyone back. But I mean, again, this is fiqh. This is just so that you have an understanding of how things work, because if the follower is praying in a row by himself, in the Shafi'i madhab, he doesn't get the reward for jama'ah, right? So that's why it's like, that there should be more than one person in the row. And so if people understood their fiqh, they would also understand why they're being pulled back, right, in those instances. It is not right for a follower to precede the imam in his movements or to move simultaneously with him. Rather, it is proper for him to make his movement slightly later. So he should not move to bow until the Imam has reached the full position of bowing, and he should not move to prostrate until the Imam's forehead has touched the ground. So this is the meaning of being a follower. This is the whole point of being a follower, is you're following the Imam behind his steps. Whatever the Imam does, then you follow the Imam. You don't precede him, in other words, get ahead of the Imam, nor do you do it at the same time. But rather you wait until the Imam goes into the position that he's going into, and then you follow the Imam into that position. So that's the end of that section on the etiquette of the prayer, of leading the prayer and following the prayer. The next section is now on the adab al-Jumu'ah. So this is now the etiquette of the Friday prayer, Salat al-Jumu'ah. Okay, sure. We can take questions after that section. No problem.
In the first section, are there different rules for females?
You mean in terms of
like if there's, are we supposed to be reciting out loud if we're alone? No, for women, I mean, they can if they're by themselves completely, or if they're a group of women praying together. If there are men present, then no, you don't recite, and that's just out of the etiquette and the adab that when it comes to just having that sense of shyness and modesty, that it's not befitting for a woman to beautify her voice in the presence of men for recitation of Quran. If she is alone or she's praying with jama'ah, then it's like jama'ah of women only, then it's permissible. But in those cases, the woman who's leading, she actually stands in the same line as the women, so she doesn't stand out ahead. They stand in the same line, and they might be like just a slight, being slightly ahead, right? Yeah, like very slightly ahead, but they would not like do as men would, where there's they stand out in front and then the followers are behind them. Are there other questions? I have one more question. Because we're not living in a Muslim country and we don't generally hear the adhan around us.
Yeah.
At what point is it okay to pray? Like sometimes, like when it comes in, I'll just pray right, like as soon as it comes in. But is there a period of time that we should be waiting? Because traditionally we would have heard the adhan.
Right. So the condition, one of the conditions for praying the Fard prayer is that you have certainty that the time has entered. Okay? And so I know that nowadays we no longer are observing the natural phenomenon when it comes to the determination of the prayer times in terms of the movement of the sun. So we just simply use our cell phones or adhan clocks or whatever, that as soon as you hear the adhan, then then you start. But I think that it's just out of precaution. Just if the sunnah would be, it's like, okay, what the time that it takes to give the adhan, the time that it takes to make wudu, the time that it takes to pray your sunnah, the time that it takes to make the iqamah, right? After all of that, then you pray your fard, right? And so that you give yourself that time, because remember, this is not about. I mean, we have this idea in our times that everything has got to be like clockwork, like bang on the nose, right? And that's not how it is, right? I mean, from time there's a fluidity to it. It's not rigid, right? There's a fluidity to it, and that's something that again, it's just being a part of that, because you don't see like the sun like moving in the sky like this, right? It's just it's part of creation. There's a fluidity, there's a smoothness to that motion, and so aligning ourselves with creation. That's what the prayer is about. Is when we align ourselves with creation towards everything is in that state of sujood. Everything is in a state of prayer or remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Align yourself with that and be aware of that, right? It's about getting ourselves into that sort of mode of thinking where we're actually considering, and that's the whole point of why we would look at the sun to observe the time of the prayers. is to align ourselves with creation, because it's all a sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The sun and the moon and the stars and the trees and the mountains are all signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So treat them as signs, be aware of them as signs. Sure. Right. Right. Yeah. No, I mean, again, like our lifestyle's very different, right? We're living in very different times, and even when we take those moments out of the day, is to pause, and even for women, for example, who are menstruating, they're not praying, right? And so sometimes, from a spiritual perspective, they feel that they're missing out, even though Allah is giving them the same reward as if they were praying, because they would be praying had they not been in that state of menstruation. But there are, narrations of women that they do a practice of actually just taking a moment and sitting down and doing dhikr during the times of prayer, right? So when the time of prayer comes, they don't pray, but they take a moment, they sit down and they do some dhikr, right? Just again, it's just because of that habit and bringing oneself into that state of awareness, right? I know sometimes the attitude is like, okay, we get a break, right? And we're lucky kind of thing. But just maintaining that connection, and so that spiritual aspect is always there. That whatever time it would take you to do the prayer, sit down and make some dhikr. Just say tasbih, for example, and make wudu. It's okay. Not with the intention of removing the state of ritual impurity, right? Because you can't remove it until you're done from the menstruation. But even just making the wudu as an act of nafil, for the purpose of the etiquette of making dua, for example, or the etiquette of making tasbih, right? That it's nafil, it's not something that is fard. But again, it's just a way of sort of having that spiritual aspect, continuing that, keeping it sort of revived within oneself. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? It's not going to be considered as like a bid'ah or something like that. No, because when we're talking about the generalities of dhikr, then it's permissible to do dhikr in these different states. Does that answer the question? Kind of. It's okay. So again, the condition. No, I get it. But the condition. If we're talking, because fiqh deals with what's bare minimum. Bare minimum is I know for a fact that the time has entered. Once I know for a fact that the time has entered and I pray my prayer, it's valid. If that's what the question is. Yes, it's considered as valid. As long as I'm certain that the time of the prayer has entered. Right? And so I'm not doubtful. Is it dhuhr time? Is it not dhuhr time? I'll just pray it anyways. La. You have to be certain. Right? That, okay, yes, it is now dhuhr time. And that's why it's good to wait a few minutes, right? In terms of, after the time of the prayer enters, just because even there are different ways of how the prayer times are calculated through, like the timetables, right? Especially for Fajr and for Isha, right? Maghrib is pretty clear cut. But and then in terms of Dhuhr or Asr, there are different ways in which that for Asr especially, how it's calculated. So, waiting a few minutes, there's no harm in that.
For me, the 5 minutes will turn into like half an hour, then an hour.
Yeah. I mean...
there's 5 minutes left to the other prayer.
Yeah. I mean, subhanAllah, like the part of the prayer is also that there's an aspect of discipline in it, right? And so we kind of have to balance things out, right? So the next section is the etiquette of Friday. Know that Friday is a day of celebration for the believers. It is an honored day that Allah Most High has chosen for this ummah. In it is an unknown period of time during which no Muslim servant asks Allah Most High for something he needs, but that He grants it to him. So there are many hadiths that talk about the virtue and the bounty of Jumu'ah, of the day of Jumu'ah, that it's the best day of the week, and it's the day that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen for this ummah as that day of Eid. It's considered as Eid, and that's what in Arabic it says, اعلم أن الجمعة عيد المؤمنين. It is Eid, it's a celebration, right? And so Eid also means it's something that occurs over and over, every period of time. But it is the best of the days of the week, and Allah has honored and blessed this ummah with the day of Friday. It's the day that Adam was created, the day that the day of judgment will take place, and there are many different virtues when it comes to the day of Friday. Now, in terms of that day or the moment in which a person makes dua or a Muslim makes dua that is answered, the scholars, they differ about when that period or that sa'atul ijaba is known as, that moment or that hour of when a person's dua is answered. Some scholars believe that it is after Asr prayer, so from Asr until the sun sets on Maghrib, that's a predominant opinion, that's the sa'atul ijaba. Others believe that it's actually during the Jummah prayer when the Imam sits down between the two khutbahs, when he says أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله العظيم لي ولكم, and then he sits down. That some scholars say that's that moment of when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers the prayer, and even though it's a very short moment, but usually it's considered as the time after Asr. And we have narrations like Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha as Zahra. She used to leave all of her duties and things that she was occupied with during just before sunset, during the last hour of Friday, and she would just dedicate that to making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala radiallahu ta'ala anha. So the idea of it being unknown is that you're always striving for it, being in that state of continually seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His blessing. So prepare for it on Thursday by cleaning your clothes and by glorifying Allah much and seeking His forgiveness on Thursday evening, for it is a time that equals the special moment of Friday in merit. So Thursday evening, Islamically, we know that the time periods of the night and the day, they're single time periods, right? And so when sunset happens, right? Like, so right now it's 9:20. When the sun sets in a few minutes' time, it's actually going to be Tuesday, right? So the day shifts, and so then it always begins night, day, right? So it's a single period of night and then a single period of day. That's Islamically how it is. So this midnight where it's like 12 a.m. and then all of a sudden the day switches, that is not something that is from within our faith tradition. And so that's why when we talk about Friday evening, it's actually Thursday night after Maghrib. That's what is meant by Friday evening, the evening of Friday, right? Not after sunset on Friday, because then Friday is over at that point. And so make intention to fast on Friday, but along with fasting Saturday or Thursday, because there is a prohibition against fasting on Friday alone. And this is something that, there are hadiths that talk about not singling out Fridays when it comes to fasting, but you should fast a day before or a day after in that regard. And then when the time of Fajr comes, Friday morning, have a ghusl, ritual bath. For a bath on Friday is an obligation upon every adult. That is an established, emphasized practice. So when he's saying that, that it's an obligation, فإن غسل يوم الجمعة واجب على كل محتلم واجب أي ثابت مؤكد. So it's a sunnah. Wajib not in the sense of that it's sinful if you don't. No, wajib in the sense that this is a strong sunnah, an established and emphasized sunnah, that there's much reward in it, so a person should do that. Then dress up nicely with white clothes, for that is the clothing Allah Most High likes best, and that's based on a hadith that Imam al-Tirmidhi narrates. Use the best smelling perfume you have and be very thorough in cleaning your body by shaving, cutting your hair, trimming your nails, brushing your teeth, and carrying out all other kinds of personal hygiene, including perfuming of yourself. So again, we understand the differences between the genders in terms of the etiquettes. If a woman is going to be at home and she does this within the confines of her home, then she gets rewarded for that. If she's going to go out, then we know there are prohibitions in terms of, like tazyin or ornamenting oneself or wearing perfume and these types of things. Again, just in terms of understanding the gender etiquettes that should be in place. It's not to prohibit women from going to the mosque, but if they are going to go to pray in the mosque for Jummah prayer, then of course they clean themselves, they do their ghusl and whatnot, but in terms of putting on perfume and whatnot, those are things that should be avoided, just so as not to go against the prophetic traditions that indicate our sisters not to do that. Then go early to the mosque, to the main mosque, making your way there calmly and unhurriedly. For indeed, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Whoever goes to the mosque in the first hour, it is as if he offered a camel in sacrifice to Allah. Whoever goes in the second hour, it is as if he offered a cow. Whoever goes in the third hour, it is as if he offered a sheep. Whoever goes in the fourth hour, it is as if he offered a chicken. Whoever goes in the fifth hour, it is as if he offered an egg. And when the Imam emerges, the registers are folded, closed, the pens lifted, and the angels gather at the pulpit to listen to the remembrance of Allah." So when it comes to talking about, the first hour, right? مَنْ رَاحَ إِلَى الْجُمُعَةِ فِي السَّاعَةِ الْأُولَى. What is the السَّاعَةِ الْأُولَى? It refers to after the time of Fajr. So basically from Fajr until Jum'ah, you divide that into 6 parts, right? So that's 6 hours. It's not literally 6 hours in terms of 60 minutes, because that time is going to shift throughout the year, right? But the idea is that, from the time of Fajr until Jum'ah prayer, that, you divide that into 6 parts. And so then the first hour is talking about the first 6 of those hours. And then the last hour is going to be, when the Imam is going to get up onto the minbar. And so that's how we understand, in terms of going in the Sa'at al-Ula or the Sa'at al-Thaniya. And that you get the different levels of reward in terms of as if you offered a sacrificed a camel or a cow or a sheep, etc. It is said that people gain closeness to Allah on the Day of Judgment according to how early they come to the Friday prayer. So there's a lot of merit in doing that. Then when you have entered the mosque, seek out the first row. If people have gathered, do not step over their shoulders or pass in front of them. Sit close to a wall or pillar so that no one passes in front of you. Do not sit down until you have performed the greeting prayer. So again, this is just out of the etiquette of entering into the masjid. You try to, for men, go to the first rows, and then for the women, that would be in the last rows. That would be considered as more virtuous and rewarding. And then not to step over people. Right? So you don't try to, if there is like a row of people sitting, you don't step over them or pass over their necks or whatnot, just so that you can try to get a place in the front. That's not the proper etiquette. And then it says, it is best to pray 4 rak'ahs, in each of which reading Surah Al-Ikhlas 50 times after the Fatiha. For in a tradition it is said that whoever does this will not die until he sees his place in heaven, or his place in heaven will be shown to him. So this is a hadith that is narrated in Imam Daraqutni's collection, and there's weakness in it. But again, it's permissible to act on weak hadith in terms of the virtues that are in it, right? So there wouldn't be anything wrong in doing that. But in terms of whoever does this will see their place in heaven. It says أن من فعل ذلك لم يمت حتى يرى مقعده من الجنة أو يرى له ذلك. So what does it mean to say that you will not die until you see your place in paradise? The scholars interpret that differently in terms of they might see it, for example, in a dream, in their sleep, that they would possibly be able to see their place in paradise, or even in a state of awakeness or while awake, but it would be in the moments before death, right? So that's something that is considered as a possibility. And that's how also the scholars, they interpret the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, مَنْ رَآنِي فِي الْمَنَامِ فَسَيَرَانِي فِي الْيَقَظَةِ, that whoever sees me in a dream, then he will see me while in a state of wakefulness, right? And so some of the scholars will interpret that as being, in the moments before death, that a person would see the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there are narrations, and Imam al-Suyuti, he actually has a short treatise in his book of Fatawa, that it's called Tanwir al-Halak, which means the enlightening of the deep darkness. Halak is very deep darkness. Tanwir al-Halak fi imkan ru'yat al-Nabi wal-Malak. That, the possibility of being able to see angels and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam while in a state of wakefulness, right? And so he goes through all the different narrations of Sahaba who, even after the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he passed away, that they saw him in a state of wakefulness, right? And these are visions; these are true visions that they saw, so that they weren't just simply dreams. And then, of course, the possibility of seeing angels as well. So likewise, that's how a person would possibly see their place in heaven, is that it would be shown to them, through ilham, through inspiration, or that it would be in the moments before they actually die and go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is no name for that prayer. No, there's no name for it. Tasbih, yeah. Salat al-Tasbih. Yeah, this is not it. No, that's different. Do not omit the greeting prayer, the Tahiyyat al-Masjid, even if the Imam is delivering the sermon. So the idea here is that if a person walks into the masjid and they're late, and the Imam's already on the minbar, should a person pray their Tahiyyat al-Masjid, or should they sit down? The Shafi'is, they say, the person should pray Tahiyyat al-Masjid, but make it quick, right? So don't prolong it, but make it quick and then sit down. Whereas the Hanafis, they say that it's better for a person to omit it and to sit down if the Imam is already on the minbar. It is from the Sunnah to recite the 4 rak'ahs, in the 4 rak'ahs, Surah Al-An'am, Surah Al-Kahf, Surah Taha, and Yasin. If you cannot do this, then recite Surah Yasin, Alif Lam Mim As-Sajda, Hamim Ad-Dukhan, and Al-Mulk. Now those 4 rak'ahs would be after the person prays their Tahiyyat al-Masjid. Then they pray another 4 rak'ahs just as nafil, that on the day of Friday. And then if you don't pray those 4 rak'ahs, then it's also recommended to even just read those surahs on Friday. Do not neglect the recitation of these surahs on the eve of Friday, for their recitation holds great merit. Whoever cannot do this should recite Surah Al-Ikhlas many times and invoke many blessings and peace upon the Messenger of Allah, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, on Friday especially. And there are so many virtues for sending salawat on the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam on Fridays especially, because on that day our salawat are actually presented before the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. On other days when we say salah on the Prophet, there are angels who will take our salawat and then convey those to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Whereas on the day of Friday, they're conveyed to him directly, not through the means of angels, but he actually hears and then he responds to those salawat by name, according to some narrations, right? That he actually responds by name to the person who sends salawat upon him. Allahumma salli wa sallam wa barak alayhi. As soon as the Imam emerges, cut short your prayers and speech and occupy yourself with responding to the mu'adhin, then with listening to the sermon and learning from it, during which time you should leave off speaking completely. It states in a tradition, a person who, while the Imam is delivering the sermon, says to his companion, be quiet, or shh, has spoken needlessly. And so this understanding of, that a person has فَقَدْ لَغَى, right? وَمَنْ لَغَى فَلَا جُمْعَةَ لَهُ. And whoever talks needlessly has no Friday prayer. That this is to indicate the importance and the imperative of focusing and putting your full attention on the Imam. And so even, being distracted by anything, like if a person comes in, they shouldn't say salam to you, and if they say salam to you, you don't respond to them, right? Again, because the focus should be on the Imam and to listening to the sermon. I mean, nowadays, you'll see people that be like on their cell phones and they're chit-chatting and things like that, and this is all wrong. They should avoid doing that. And, does it invalidate the Jum'ah prayers? According to some opinions it does, according to others it doesn't. But it's still, it's like it's makruh, severely makruh, or very much severely offensive, that in order to do that. But people should leave it regardless, right? Whether it's considered as makruh or it actually invalidates the prayer, then, and that's why, like in the madhab of Imam Ahmad, it actually invalidates the prayer. That, faqad lagha, it means that they don't have Friday prayer. They would have to re-pray as Jummah, or as Dhuhr. So even saying be quiet is considered talking, right? So even just saying, usmut, right? Or uskut, amfit, right? These are things that would be considered as talking. What is proper then is to use a gesture rather than a word to silence another person during the sermon, right? So just a simple motion of, right? That should be sufficient. After this, follow the Imam in prayer as detailed before. When you have finished and made the salutation, the salam, then before speaking, recite the Fatiha 7 times, Ikhlas 7 times, the 2 chapters of protection 7 times. This protects you from one Friday to the next and will be a guard against shaitan. And then, say after that, Allahumma ya ghani, ya hamid, ya mubdi, ya mu'id, ya rahim, ya wadud, aghnini bihalalika an haramika, وبطاعتك عن معصيتك وبفضلك عن من سواك. O Allah, you are free from want. O praise one. You free from want. O praise one. O originator. O restorer. O merciful. Most merciful. O loving. Enrich me with what you have made lawful, so that I have no need of what you have made unlawful. Enrich me with obedience to you, so that I have no need to disobey you. And enrich me with your grace, so that I have no need of any other than you. After the Friday prayer, pray 2, 4, or 6 rak'ahs as sunnah, as all of these have been related in different circumstances. And then make sure you stay in the mosque until Maghrib, or at least until Asr, and search diligently for the honored moment, the Sa'at al-Ijaba, since it could be at any time in the day. For hopefully you will find it while you are in a state of humility before Allah, humbly entreating Him. And then he goes on to say, do not sit in idle gatherings in the mosque, nor with storytellers. Rather, attend only meetings of beneficial knowledge, the kind which increases your fear of Allah Most High and decreases your desire for this world. For indeed, ignorance is better for you than knowledge that does not summon you from this world to the next. So seek refuge in Allah Most High from knowledge that does not benefit. And we spoke about that before in terms of the definition of knowledge that does not benefit. And we know that it's makruh to speak of worldly affairs in the masajid. Right? The masajid are not meant as places of tijara or business or trade or things that are related to the dunya. But rather, it's about seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's blessing and having that connection with Him and that connection to the akhirah. So it's makruh to speak of dunyawi matters in the masajid. Make increased supplication at the rising of the sun, at the time when it moves from its zenith, and at its setting, as well as at the call to commence prayer when the Imam ascends the pulpit, and at the time when people stand up for the congregational prayer, for it may be that the honored moment falls at one of these times. So these are different, times in which there are, a hadith, for example, that mention between the adhan and the iqamah, that's a time when dua is accepted, or when immediately after the prayer, that it's dua is accepted. And so at these different times, he's basically giving you all these different possibilities so that you're seeing all of them, making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that these could all possibly be from that, Sa'at al-Ijaba, or the moment in which, or Sa'at al-Sharifa, that honored moment in which the dua is not rejected. Make a great effort on this day to donate in charity whatever amount you are able to, however small, so as to combine the good acts of praying, charity, fasting, reciting Quran, remembering Allah, and engaging in spiritual retreat or i'tikaf. And so we talked about that before, that anytime you're in a masjid, make the intention for doing i'tikaf. make this day of the week especially dedicated to your akhirah, to your hereafter, so that hopefully it may be a penance for the rest of your week. And so all of these are just reminders for the individual in terms of, again, we see how time is cyclical, right? And time, there's a beginning, there's an end, whether it's to the day, whether it's to the week. And so there's a cycle. And so when we connect ourselves with these cycles by those reminders that, our life, every time we wake up, there's a new beginning. When we go to sleep, it's possibly the last time that we'll go to sleep before the day of judgment. And if we do wake up in the morning, then we remind ourselves of the resurrection. So it's always about, using these as signs and reminders for us constantly, so that we're preparing ourselves for that great meeting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on that great day. So actually we won't be able to finish the chapter on fasting. It's a short section, so we'll do that next week inshallah, and then move into part 2, because Maghrib it's now time for Maghrib. But we'll do this every week inshallah, and then actually next week will be the last week that we will have before Ramadan. And then in Ramadan we're going to move into the weekend. So we'll continue doing the reading through the text, but then we'll have it during the weekend, either Saturday or Sunday at around noontime, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And we'll send out a poll just to see what time works best for everyone, whether it's Saturday or Sunday. So just before we conclude, are there any questions about the last section that we just read? Good. إن شاء الله. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد في الأولين وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد في الآخرين وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد في الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. استغفر الله.